Well, thank you. We have about an hour to answer all the questions and issues posed by the heading for this discussion, but we have a very distinguished set of panelists who, beginning from my right, from Ambassador Delia Domingo-Albert. Hello and welcome. Ambassador of the Philippines to Germany, former foreign minister, and all of us are former colleagues. We have Ivaylo Kalfin, now member of the European Parliament from Bulgaria. We have Miomir Žužil from Croatia, a former foreign minister. My colleague as European Affairs Chairman in the Turkish Parliament, Yasar Yakis. And from the European Parliament also Ioannis Kasoulides from Cyprus. And I thought we might begin this discussion with a brief round on one question, because this is very topical. I mean, we are on the eve of a very important 20 years commemoration of the Berlin Wall. So I would like to ask, knowing the impossibility of giving a single answer, but what is, in your opinion, the most important single factor which brought down the Berlin Wall and the changes in Eastern and Central Europe? And maybe what lessons this has for today. So if you begin.
Thank you, Erkki. I think that the Berlin Wall collapsed as a fact due to an accumulation of circumstances of events before that. It was not something which, the collapse happened overnight, but the reasons to do so happened during the decades before that. The simple answer is that the capitalist system won and the communist system lost the competition. But again, if we go into more details, we shall see that the type of society that we had before that, the type of closed society, was not sustainable. And the more the countries from the former communist bloc were opening, people started to travel, to communicate with their counterparts abroad, the less likely it was that this system continued. So I think that these were the circumstances, together with the economic underlying, of course, that brought to the collapse of the wall.
Thank you. Then Ambassador Domingo-Albert, who could also tell us what impact this had in the Philippines on the other side of the war.
Perhaps it will be a reverse, because people power in the Philippines came in 1986. And, I must say I perhaps have a unique experience of having been in Bonn in 1999 and watched the whole procedure unfold before our eyes. 20 years later, we sat in front of Mr. Gorbachev, Mr. Bush, and Mr. Helmut Kohl last Saturday, who told us exactly what they felt about it. But one theme that reverberated through the entire panel between these three fathers of reunification, as they call it in Germany, was the fact that the wall came down because the people made it happen. So for me as a Filipino, it also reminded me of people power in 1986, when people decided enough was enough for an authoritarian rule, and therefore they took to the streets. But one thing, of course, unique in our situation was perhaps the culture of people that was not a violent culture, but was prepared to take to the streets and sit in prayer. This is unique in Asia, because who would think of going to the streets and sitting in front of a tank and praying that the tank won't burst out at you? But this was possible in the Philippines because of this cultural tradition. What does it mean to me? Well, I was posted as well before as Consul General in East Berlin. And I used to ask myself, how long will these people take it? And I think people decided that the time was right. If you watch closely what the events that happened, perhaps for some fatalistic culture, it was meant to happen. Mr. Shabolsky, who read the letter saying that people can go out Nobody told him to read it when he did. The border guards who said, who should I call to open the borders? There was no order. So somehow, I don't know, perhaps it's the Asian fatalistic way of looking at things, somehow everything fell in place. And so it happened. And I'm here as ambassador in Berlin and enjoying a united Berlin and enjoying a united Germany. Thank you.
Thank you. And how did it seem in Croatia?
Actually, I think that I should very much agree with what Ambassador just said, and even to rephrase what Senator Ferguson said earlier, maybe because of my background as a psychologist, I tend to think that walls are primarily in the heads of the people, and then eventually they are built or destroyed. So I do agree that by sometime in the late 80s, we have that kind of psychological feeling, sense, that we do not need those kind of walls. Again, inside of our minds, inside of our heads, maybe before, even in the political action. But then that brings me to one question as long as the history, as old as the history itself. What actually creates history? Is history created by the people, or people are created by the history? This is another episode when we cannot get a straight answer to that, but I would agree also with what was mentioned before by our colleague and Prime Minister of Poland, and he said among the persons who influenced that, I certainly think that we can easily recognize that there were several very, very important persons in a proper moment of history who not only contributed, who really make it happen. I would certainly say that Pope John Paul II was the one to recognize that maybe before anyone else without making any ranking, but also to have in similar time President Reagan in the United States, Chancellor Kohl here in Germany, and President Gorbachev in Russia. Is that historical coincidence or not? I don't know. We can speculate all day about that, but the fact is that it happened. So what I would now add to that, I only hope that that continuation of destroyment of walls in people's mind continues. Unfortunately, I'm coming from the part of the world where we didn't witness that immediately, because the falling of the Berlin Wall was celebrated throughout Europe, throughout the communistic part of the Europe. But for us in Yugoslavia, it created actually, in a way, building of the new walls and not bridges. It took some time to come now to the situation where we can be relatively satisfied with how is the situation down there. But what I wanted to say, it is when we are talking about fall of Berlin Wall, we are talking about extremely important historical event, but in the same time, I think that we are talking of a symbolical event of maybe same importance, although we do not think that way very often.
Thank you very much. I think the reasons for the fall of the wall are given by the previous speakers, and I don't think that I disagree with them on any point that they underlined. Perhaps another reason was that it was an artificial division. This wall was dividing two people who had no difference between them. At one stage in the history after the Second World War, the military powers divided Germany into sectors, and this was entirely theoretical things. It did not divide anything. For this reason, there were, of course, close relations between two parts. One part of the family remained on the other side. And when I was in the university in early 60s, a professor was telling us that, well, perhaps the reunification of Germany will be materialized by every single East German escaping to the West. But I witnessed the fall of the wall when I was ambassador in Saudi Arabia, and there my good friend, the German ambassador, was very cautious on the developments because his son was the first secretary of the German embassy in Bucharest in a period where Ceausescu was about to fall. And he told his father, when he visited his father in Riyadh, that 1 week before the fall of Ceausescu, they had a staff meeting at the embassy, and they were led to the conclusion that Ceausescu was very strong and nothing could happen in the foreseeable future, and they sent an excellent report back to Bonn that Ceausescu is very strong, and 1 week later he was overthrown. And when the fall of the wall was so close, this time the German ambassador grew overcautious, and he did not expect, and it was a surprise for him as well. What was the impact of it? The impact was actually what would have happened if there was no wall at all. But I see now that there are many things which has to be accommodated, because in the East Germany there was a state system, social security system, which was different, which developed in a different manner from the West, and I presume that the German authorities' efforts continue to make the East Germany look exactly like the West. These are my comments.
Mr. Kasoulides.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, although I have been covered by the previous speakers and former colleagues of mine, I would like to emphasize the fact that the arms race between the Soviet Union and the West appeared to the eyes of the new leadership in Kremlin that it was futile. They couldn't make up to this kind of arms race. It was obvious that this was done at the expense of the prosperity of the people in the Soviet Union. The Star Wars that Ronald Reagan wanted to introduce, all these factors working synergistically together, the role of the Pope, John Paul II, etc., brought down the world. But in my opinion, and something was said by Mr. Yakis, which I fully agree, these kind of walls are against nature. And something that appears against nature, I happen to be a member of the medical profession, they are expelled by the organism sooner or later because they cannot be accepted. And with all due respect, with Senator Ferguson, I don't agree that there are two kinds of walls. One that keeps people in and another that keeps people out. During the medieval period of our history, this was true. Fortresses against invading powers were obliging people to have walls for defense. But in our new modern world, a free world, a globalized world, a world of values and values of freedom in particular, there is only one kind of wall, the wall that prevents freedom, the wall that prevents people for communicating with each other, walls that keep people in. And even the security wall in Israel, it depends which side of the wall you are to look at it. If you are on the side of people that used to go just opposite to find their hospital or their school, and they cannot do that now, or they are field that they have been cultivating, and they have to go around for hours and hours to reach it, well, of course, it's not a wall that wants to keep people out. And besides, you don't collectively punish a population because of some terrorists that do heinous acts. Thank you.
Well, you might as well continue because everybody will be expecting you to say, how will the wall which is dividing your island come down?
Well, the only way that these kind of walls do come down is dialogue. It's dialogue. There is no other way to resolve problems nowadays. The time of using force is time belonging to the past. Negotiating, sitting at the negotiating table, dialoguing, until in the end you get rid exactly of what it appears to be against nature, problems like the problem in my own country. There is a dialogue now going on. I have a number of ideas that I reserve to express tomorrow morning when I will be the speaker here, of how I think practically this dialogue will succeed. Allow me to say tomorrow.
Okay, we'll return to that then tomorrow. Had I had to answer my question myself, I would actually have said the microchip. People matter and people determine outcomes, but also technology matters. And it was the failure of the centralized command economies to keep up with the free market economies and cultures through the technological revolution of the microchip that made it impossible to continue with the centralized system. It was beyond repair, and the microchip, also in many other respects, has changed the world. And it is perhaps also one factor behind our subject today, which is interdependence. And I would like now to ask you, how do you see interdependence? What is the primary reason or the reasons for us being so dependent on each other today? And I would like to, again, say one answer, my own answer, to one degree, is that given the fact that during our lifetime, we are about the same age on the stage, the world's population has grown threefold, from 2.3 billion to 6.9 billion. And we have never had this kind of world where we have so many people interacting with each other. And do we think that any group of people, any nation, any state can go it alone any longer? So how has this affected, and how this should this affect our view of the world? And do you agree with this reason for the growth of interdependence? Let's begin with you.
Indeed, in my view, the present economic crisis that we all have faced, financial economic crisis, has demonstrated exactly that no one can go it alone any longer in this world. And there is no more obvious example from the fact. It's a simplistic example, but it is an example nonetheless. For example, that China, who had trillions in reserve in the dollar currency, understood that it should not panic, it should not try to change it into some other currency, because this would have meant the destruction of their export markets. So it is understood by everybody now that we are all interdependent, that the future is with cooperation and understanding by everybody, and this is how we are going to face so many challenges that are above nations and above national interests. For instance, from the economic point of view, protectionism would have been a disaster. It would have been a temporary solution for one, but a disaster for all. Whereas issues like the climate change and the Copenhagen conference that is coming quite soon is an evidence that there are problems now that we have to face them together and not separately.
Is it just a problem, or is it also a condition for our survival to solve the climate change, stop climate change from progressing? It is for both of you.
Okay, shall I take the floor? Actually, I believe that with the globalization and interdependence, there are also overlapping concept, in my opinion. The more the world is globalized, and especially with the advanced innovations in the communications, the globalization will continue, and specialization in various areas. So relative competitivity of nations, regions, climates also will surface better, and this will add to the welfare of the world population. Because some people are better in certain things. It's like in a football game. Some are scorers, some are backs, some play in other places, all according to their capacity. Nations also could be divided like this or characterized like this, and groups or segments of nations could also be characterized that way. So with the globalization and with becoming at the reach of everybody is at the reach of everyone else, this brings competitivity to the surface, and you can reach whatever you need at wherever it is in which part of the world. So this increases interdependence, globalization becomes strengthened, and altogether the welfare of the people, I think, will be strengthened. This is what I expect in the future. Shall I give back to...
Thank you. Of course, that we can very easily agree that in the world that we live, we very much depend on each other. And generally, I think that all of us coming from same diplomatic background, we would generally agree about almost everything and probably make this a little bit boring. Let me try to be a little bit different. I tend to be in that minority who doesn't believe that the world is ruled by economical motives and economical powers, because when we go back into history, economy was changing and some things were remaining the same. People tend to think, yes, the war in the Middle East is because of the oil. However, the war was centuries before the oil, and I'm afraid, I do not predict that it will continue even when oil is not so important. Maybe I think that way because of my background. But let me offer you...
If oil is not that important, how about water in the Middle East?
Water or something else. But let me then offer one thought why I think that what actually creates, in a way, basic conflict, but also basic challenge and basic opportunity for all of us. And that is difference. We are different. We are different as individuals, we are different as a group, we are different as a nations, we are different as a continents, and we can go on and on and on and on. So in the world of globalization, there is a tendency also toward unification, toward ignoring the difference. I believe that is actually not decreasing chances for conflicts, but increasing chances. I think that the solution would be to recognize the difference, to accept the difference, and to learn how to live with the differences. So that's why I, for example, appreciate very much the mission of the diplomacy, like one that is promoted through this institute, and that is cultural diplomacy. So culture is area of human life where we already learned that by being different, that make us better, not worse. But that is not the case in everything else, if you try to think that way. I don't know how much I was able to explain with the short sentences, very, very actually big topic. But basically, I think that kind of conflict that it is happening between globalization and unification tends always to increase chances for any kind of solution that are not those that we would like to see.
Ambassador Domingo-Albert.
Yes, well, perhaps I'd like to emphasize a point here that I'm very glad that they invited me, because otherwise it's really so Eurocentric. You forget that there's a huge continent and a huge group of people out there called Asia. And we too are concerned with all the issues that you have been raising. When you think of Asia, what is Asia? Is it a geographic reality, or is it a definition? I think for ease of reference, we always say Asia starts from, say, Pakistan and all eastward. But you have Northeast Asia, you have Southeast Asia, and what we call West Asia, which to Europe is East Asia. But anyway, that whole geographic situation. But let me just focus on where I belong. I belong to a group of 10 countries called Southeast Asia. We're a country of 92 million people. Even with 92 million, we realized we can't go it alone. So as early as 1967, we decided we can't move by ourselves. Let's get our neighbors together, and we formed what you call the Southeast Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Our task was not to look for differences. Our task was to look for commonalities. We all came from different backgrounds. You have Indonesia, the biggest Islamic country. You have Philippines, the only Christian country in the region. You had the Buddhist countries of continental Asia. But we all felt that with looming bigger issues, we needed to get together. We needed each other. True, we had differences. We had border problems. We still have them. But the task was to find commonalities that will make us grow together and move forward together. And I think after 40 years of very slow movement, we have found a lot of these commonalities, and we even found a way to try to avoid the financial crisis. When nobody was coming to help us, we decided to put all our funds together. We melted our gold jewelry together and saved the situation. I think these are also, it's a curious way, the way our group sort of evolved, because it went very slowly, but when we saw Europe getting together very closely, we saw it as a fortress, and we said, oh gosh, we better stick together, otherwise we will be lost in all these globalization developments. And it's interesting to see that what started as an internal desire to be together was really strengthened by the sort of perceived threat of outside regions that we thought might not be helpful to us in moving forward. But we realized that, again, with this 10 together, we had to move even wider, and so we had devised an equation called 10 plus equation. 10 plus 1 means 10 plus China, 10 plus Japan, 10 plus Korea. Now we have an interesting equation called 10 plus 3, which means the 10 countries of Southeast Asia plus the 3 countries of China, Japan, and Korea. And we all feel that by doing so, we could better find the commonalities that bind us together in the region and make us feel more comfortable and more confident in facing the issues that we face today, like climate change, financial instability, and the issue of water. And if you look at this evolving community, we started from a letter C, small. By 2015, we hope to be one Asian community.
Thank you. Ivaylo.
First, I think that globalization, which is a fact, is not about unification, it's about diversification. That's the opposite. Because with globalization you have much more information, much more opportunities, much more instruments. If we think about what happened in Iran after the elections, for example, if it was not Twitter, then you would get the official communiques of the government press agency there. And this is one single example where technologies are about diversification. They're about different opportunities. The thing is that we have witnessed in the past also that some of the great achievements of technology, of science, sometimes were very destructive if they were not managed properly. It's not that I would say that globalization would be destructive, but this is about the issue of how you manage globalization in the public interest. And yesterday one of the panelists said something very interesting about globalization of democracy, of democratic means. And this is what I wonder, whatever happens with globalization, this is a trend which is going to continue, of course, and we shall more and more realize how close we have to act in terms of environment, economic development, security threats, etc., etc. We still lack the mechanisms for public participation, for democratic participation in this globalized world. I mean, we have the scientific facts on one side, and we have the lack of democratic institutions and international institutions, including with their potential, trying to manage all these developments in the public.
The topic of or the title of our discussion, Balancing Global Public Goods and National Priorities, was forwarded neither by me or my secretary, because I might have made a remark about the implication that in today's world there actually could be national priorities or national interest which you could further in a sustainable way at the expense of other countries' own national interests, because this is what interdependence is about. There are really, in the long run, no free riders in this world. Is this perception right? And if it is, then how long can we sustain the fiction of sovereign nation states, which we have all represented in international diplomatic conferences and so on, which is a legacy of the 30 Years' War in Europe from 1648, when the principle of sovereignty was established. What should we do with this concept? Can we replace it with something more workable in today's world? And that really brings us to the issue which you raised about global management. How do we manage globalization and all the what are the structures needed? How are we coping today? Who would like to respond first? Please.
Well, first of all, I would like to say that I am a firm believer that the national interest nowadays coincides with the global interest in many aspects, and I'm not an idealist about what the world is all about. But in a direct answer to your question, the structures are not yet there, but look at how we have faced the issue of the economic crisis. The G20 was a new kind of device because this economic crisis should be dealt with by economic powers, by emerging powers, and by the developing world. And all the factors should be taken into consideration, and so far so good in the way it is done. It brought up the necessity for a better and more democratic representation in the board of the International Monetary Fund. That's another example of how globally necessity for reshaping the way matters are organized. And then going to the issue of sovereignty, I'm sorry, I will begin by European Union, Madam Ambassador, but I have a comment to make on Asia, which is very important. But European Union is an example of a family of member states who have relinquished part of their sovereignty, and therefore the importance of sovereignty is getting gradually second place. And I think that other examples around the world will be appearing more and more. I quite agree with Madam Ambassador that we should not at all underestimate the developments in Asia. Actually, a very interesting article from Mr. Brzezinski regarding the role and future of NATO is demonstrating that the center of the new world is no longer the North Atlantic, is no longer the issue of wars within Europe or the Cold War, but the center now is from Egypt to the Far East in the Indian Ocean. Look at all the problems: Somalia, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, the misunderstanding, and we must say that we cannot ignore it, and we must look how we are going to deal with it. The misunderstanding and perhaps the valid grievances that do come from the Muslim world towards the way they looked upon others towards them, the collective necessity for security regarding the new threats in the world, which is international terrorism, nuclear proliferation, failed states, and so forth. So, yes, we are living in new developments around the world, which is no longer what it was before. Thanks.
So Turkey is seeking to join the European Union and give up part of its sovereignty.
Yes, we are. But if I have to say everything that I have in mind, perhaps there will be no time for questions, which will be the most interesting part of our panel, most probably, and we should give the audience time to ask questions. On the specific question that you asked, I think that the nation states, of course, were born perhaps centuries ago, but the international community is still, from the standpoint of the relations between the states or giving up the sovereignty, it is in its infancy. Democracy at the national level developed throughout the centuries. Now every individual human being in a state is equal and the state is guarantor of it. But in the international community, there is no structures yet to make equal treatment or to treat fairly the interests of every nation as compared to the interests of other nations. Coming back to your specific question, when a country signs an international convention, let's suppose convention on extradition, when you become part of this convention, you give up part of your sovereignty because you have to extradite a person who qualifies extradition according to the terms. So signing international treaties and conventions were already some sort of giving up sovereignty. And in the case of European Union, many European Union countries, starting from the founders, they gave up part of their sovereignty. When I am asked this question by many people, how Turkey will be prepared to give up part of its sovereignty, I ask them, how did they manage to do it before Turkey? When they joined the European Union, when they established the European Union, they did it to the expense of their sovereignty, and it functions, more or less good. It is not an ideal. What is the ideal environment in the international community to treat properly differing, non-convergent, non-concurrent interest of theirs? It is a very far-fetched. It could be only dreamed in utopia, because if nations are sovereign, and if the community of nations are going to decide on the basis of their individual capacity, let's say every country has equal vote, it will not work, because there are countries with much less population. Malta has a population of 350,000 people, and Germany has 81 million. And if they have similar votes, of course, it will not be fair. If you treat on the basis of their population, then small countries will suffer from it. The European Union, European Parliament model is the closest to what could be regarded as an equitable treatment of nations. But there again, there are disparities because there is a limit of at least 2 seats in the European Parliament for every country, and 96 is the upper limit. In this case, every Maltese parliamentarian represents something like 175,000 people, whereas every German parliamentarian represents 800,000 people. There's no equality again. But there is no limit to it. I mean, you cannot go very far and you cannot stretch it. What could be done in the utopia is to submit everything to the referendum and decide according to the number of the votes every idea is supported by. But this is an utopia. We are not close to it. It's not at the horizon. And the United States model of having a House of Representatives and a Senate where every state is represented by 2 people is one step further. European Union model is closer to democracy or equitable treatment between nations, but it's not entire equity. Thank you.
Well, we are fortunate here that all of us come from countries where governments are elected and can be dismissed by the electorate, but we have to manage globalization also with countries where the electorates do not have that kind of power as yet. So that is another challenge for global management. In Europe, I think we can do it, and in other regions, but globally this is a problem. How do you see it?
Certainly there is problem, but when I think about the future of our world, our only world, and unique, I think that democratization is a process that it is going on, and I think that that is something unstoppable. So it is a matter of time, and that time can be measured in years, decades, 20 years, but I think that that will happen. In the same way, I think that the concept of sovereignty is already changing, and eventually it will be changed. But I don't think that that concept is actually disappearing. I think that sovereignty is of almost same importance how it was maybe a century ago, but different in nature. When we think in Europe, and in that regard I think that we are indeed a little bit too much Eurocentric, we always think in terms of sovereignty based on a nation state. But that is primarily European, up to a certain level Asian. When we look sovereignty, for example, on American continent, we have sovereignty based on something different. So when I think about European Union, and I know that in my own country as well as in Turkey, as it was in Poland, as it was in Spain before, in Finland also, it's always question among ordinary people who maybe even can have difficulties to define the term sovereignty, but there is that question, okay, but am I losing more maybe my identity when I'm joining European Union? And that is existing question. I think what is the solution and what's actually happening, it's not to lose sovereignty, it's to replace it. Because European Union is also a certain kind of sovereignty, maybe even stronger than it was sovereignty based on nation state. So I do think that that is a concept that is changing. How much and how quickly, I really wouldn't dare. I think that we are all optimistic now after success of Lisbon Treaty, but when we think about all discussions, I think that the issue of sovereignty is really one of the key issues for the future of European Union.
And for Asian cooperation?
Yes, thank you. I always like to refer to cooperation because we used to say, let's observe closely how the EU is working, and let's learn from their experiences, learn from their successes, and learn from their mistakes. One of the first things we learned, not to have a a treaty, like the Lisbon Treaty. So we said, what do? Let's have a charter, a 2-page charter that will have all the elements that we find will bind us together. So in 1 year, in Cebu City, Manila, we had the charter. The charter is now giving a juridical and a legal basis for ASEAN. So in a way, it also reflects what we in Asia think when we build the Asian Free Trade Area, for example, which is impacting on a lot of new industries. People have to close shops because they can't compete, and so on and so forth. So what did we do? We said, perhaps we can find a way out. If we are not all ready to accede to the free trade area, let's have 10 minus X equation, which means, okay, for the 9 that have agreed to do it, give more time for X, the minus X, to catch up, while everybody will be moving forward and not be hindered by the minus X equation that we will eventually we have to support anyway. But to keep the machinery moving, we will not get bogged down by one who would say, I can't accede to the free trade area because it affects my agriculture, my fishing, etc. So we have opted for an equation called 10 minus X. Of course, this is a very difficult thing to accept because everybody wants to take a decision by consensus. Now, looking at the issue of sovereignty, when I chaired the Security Council in 2004, we were confronted with a lot of issues on our participation in Iraq and other countries. And we at home felt that while you cannot question sovereign rights of states doing what they want to do, we felt that strengthening the role of civil society was a very important contribution we could make. So I decided to put in my agenda the role of civil society in post-conflict peace building. I tell you, it took 1 year to convince my colleagues because they said, no, that belongs to the ECOSOC. It doesn't belong in the Security Council. So I said, no, we feel that civil society should be more and more engaged in issues of conflicts, in issues of peace building, and therefore I want it there. And I went to Mr. Kofi Annan and I said, I want to see civil society discussed in the Security Council. He says, you're the chair, you decide. And I'm with you all the way. And we came out, and very happily it was the issuance of the Cardoso report on the role of civil society. And I think this is one area that I think when you think of sovereignty, you'll be amazed how many across countries and across regions, how people think alike. So it is not really questioning sovereignty, but it's a way of getting issues across from civil society to policymakers and decision makers. Thank you.
Okay, I think that if we ask the audience, are you ready to give a plea of sovereignty, we should have a very widely negative answer. In most of the cases, this is about the democratic institutions and the principles and the possibilities to participate in decision making. On a national level, this mechanism is established. On the international level, it again goes mainly to nation states, although in the last years there are already very powerful NGOs that are global and that can influence the decision making. But again, when we speak about more power to some institutions beyond the nation state, we should give the answer how the people can participate in the decision making there. Because nobody would be very enthusiastic in a small country that most of the decisions are taken in the neighboring large country. for the life you are living. I mean, you can tackle global issues, you can tackle any particular problem which is important for the world, but people are living on a very concrete agenda, and they have their own agenda which is there. So for the time being, I really don't see the possibilities just to abandon the nation state, the sovereign principles, and to just start wondering what might replace them. There is a tendency to go more international. I'm absolutely sure that all the UN institutions, if they're properly reformed, they might provide some of the answers, not all of them. The big question is how the structures of the civil society are included in the decision-making on international level. But again, this cannot be in a simple contradiction with the sovereignty and with the nation state. Again, I think that we have to look for the answers for this structure of the society, of the international society that we would like to see, again, without forgetting what we have achieved so far.
Thank you. Does anyone in the audience now have a quick question we could take? Please. Just give the microphone.
Take one of the microphones. Thank you. Okay. I'll give it to someone else first, actually.
I'm afraid we can't take all, but give it to the nearest.
Let's start in the back this time.
Many thanks for the opportunity. Minister Kasoulides, καλημέρα σας. You raised a very important fundamental concept for diplomacy, and that was dialogue. And dialogue has been going on in Cyprus for more than 35 years now. Dialogue involves two parties, talking and listening. And I think there is a problem with listening from the other side. And your beautiful island has been divided for 35 years. And my main fear is that we will create a status quo that will eliminate all hopes for unification. Your comment, please. Thank you.
Well, you can also, I think that is a topic that we'll discuss in tomorrow, so I think we can go more in depth into that. Was there someone else near the microphone? But there is someone already with the microphone, please. Please.
Thank you. My name's Colby Spencer. I'm a graduate student at Columbia University in New York. And in terms of the title of this discussion on public goods, I know a public good we discuss a lot, especially with Copenhagen coming up, is air quality. And this council and forum has sort of given me more influence when it comes to everyone doing their part when it comes to interdependence. And it's not just one person picking up everyone's slack, but even small countries taking responsibility for their actions. And sort of aside from what Copenhagen decides, if each of your individual nations were to influence policy for carbon emissions reduction, what would your first steps be? And in terms of economic and business sacrifices within your individual nations, what would you advise the current leaders to do?
A very simple question. I think we should be now nearing the end of the panel, given the time constraint. So please respond to these questions from the floor. But I would like to take up one more item, which was actually mentioned. The Security Council and the G20 have been mentioned in this discussion. And they are perhaps the two most important fora for global governance. My question is, are we satisfied with these? The UN reform has been under discussion for a long time, including Security Council reform, enlarging the Security Council. The G20 is certainly needed, because we all know that no G192 will ever be able to manage all the issues. But the G20 has no legitimacy. It has been self-appointed, and none of our countries are in that group, except for the European Union indirectly. So could we perhaps envisage combining the reform of the Security Council into a new council of 20 to 25 members, some new permanent members, no new vetoes, and make this into the new G20. Because it would then give us, all of us, at least a theoretical chance of being among the non-permanent members, say once every 30 years, and perhaps to have some increased legitimacy in the eyes of the world's population. But please feel free to also answer the questions from Tavo. Shall we begin with you?
To start with the question, I mean, Copenhagen is very important, but again, it is important because the public consciousness and the public awareness of the threats of climate change was raised very much. The price for decreasing carbon emission is very high, and we have to admit that. And in many countries, especially developing countries, countries in Africa, countries in Asia, you're going to see the argument, you didn't have your restrictions where you were developing your economies, and now you want to put the restrictions on our economies when we are developing. That's why this mechanism has to also suggest compensation mechanisms on that. That's a very sophisticated issue to convince people that they have to pay a price for the future generations. In many countries, the long-term vision is wishful thinking. In many countries, especially where you have poorer population, they don't care about long-term. They care about short-term. They care what's happening today, tomorrow, next week, next year. And this is the difficulty with Copenhagen and the climate change. And I think that we have the chances to achieve something very good. I mean, maybe not the perfect, but if all the countries, and I'm very happy that the new administration in the United States also made very clear signs in that direction, then that would be a positive step forward. Not solving all the issues. Maybe we are not going to these 350 particulars, etc., but I think that whatever is done is going to be very important because of the awareness that the climate is something which is very, very near future, in fact. I mean, it's not that distant future when we talk about water supply, about quality of air, etc., and about the ozone. What Erkki, you suggested, of course, the Security Council is reflecting the post-Second World War situation in the world. This is how it was composed. And again, we have the issue with sovereignty. You have many countries, namely permanent members of the Security Council, who do not want to give up with their sovereign rights and to take decisions and have the veto power on the Security Council. Again, the only answer to that might be enough public pressure that this should not be the case. It's very difficult. I'm not optimistic that it's going to happen very quickly. You're right that there is a debate since years about the UN reform and the Security Council reform. There are several very good proposals what should be the principles for this change, and I think that everybody has to press for that. I mean, the Security Council is not what the world needs now. Whether it has to assume economic tasks, I don't know. I mean, G20 is something very positive. It's self-born. It was created very rapidly because of the crisis. Maybe if we had used the UN mechanisms or the World Bank mechanisms, it would take much longer to get to the same agreement between the largest economies. So I don't have a problem that my country is not participating there. I mean, if the largest economies really care about preventing the future development of this crisis. But again, when we speak about some democratic forms of controlling what is happening in the global level, this global governance level, certainly G20 is not the perfect mean, and we have to look for some other ways where you can have some participating democracy.
Nice to be a lady. You have two offers. Thank you. Well, for one who lost 30 meters of my beachfront in the past month, where the Philippines suffered four major typhoons, we are interested in the impact of climate change, as you can imagine. We have had legislations on the Air Act, on water, but these are all undertaken, looking forward to the Copenhagen meeting. But there's one point that I'd like to reiterate and perhaps contribute to the debate. We have seen very interesting projects from countries like Germany that do a lot to help technologically countries that don't have the technical ability to study geohazards, for example, up to how far from the coastline should you build your house, up to how high the mountain can you build your house, etc. And I think there are so many evolving technologies that are coming out today, and I've been closely monitoring, especially in Germany, where they're very keen. And of course, the IRENA, I'm sure you've heard about the new organization that is looking into renewable energy and into sharing technologies. And what I look forward to the meeting in Copenhagen would be a commitment for sharing technologies. Perhaps, well, funds as well, but technologies is something we need very desperately. And I think this is where we will put in a very strong position. On the Security Council, you know, Margaret Mead said once that big deeds start with a few wise men getting together. Perhaps we should get those wise men together to look at, I know there have been studies on the reform of the Security Council, but if this is done on a more global scale, on everyone feeling that there is a stake for them, and start moving and having your own groups and getting into a kind of a chain reaction, I think the drops of water will cause a rock to break, and perhaps someday, we are patient in Asia, we like the Chinese, everything starts with a step. And if everyone here feels strongly that the reform should be undertaken, by all means, everybody think about it. Put your thoughts together. You'll be surprised if we get somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that on a question, very important question that was asked, and what any country in the world can do, certainly there is only one global answer that I see, and that is to raise the level of awareness. That is a really common problem for the whole world, not only for some. As my colleague before, I also experience feeling in peoples, in nations that are not as developed, that some kind of feeling that ecology in general terms is both a combination of privilege and obligation of those who are developed. And you will very often face the answer, yes, you are telling us now to do something that you are not doing, and because you are not doing that some decades ago, you are at that level of development and we are at this level of development. I think that that is very, very important question, and that proves that more global issues should be dealt together. When it comes to G20, and can that model be any kind of replacement for what we have in a Security Council? No doubt that the G20 is more effective, more efficient. Maybe because it is concentrated on pragmatical problems that are problems of everyone. And then sovereignty is not so big an issue in the terms as we discussed before. But when we look into United Nations is, frankly, and that's my experience, everything is about sovereignty. Not only Security Council, General Assembly is also about sovereignty. So unless that concept of sovereignty is changing, that feeling that maybe it is not needed for this time that we live now, I'm afraid that we will spend many, many interesting diplomatic talks how to change it without being able to change it.
Thank you very much. I also believe that the public awareness, we have to start from the public awareness, and then it will go to the elected people, then to the decision makers, etc. Because we are moving very quick now towards a catastrophic situation regarding the global warming. The melting of ice in the poles will accelerate in the future, in the near future, because at present, when there are ice there, the sunshine is reflected and then it doesn't go into the sea. The more it melts, the more the sunshine will fall in the sea, and the seawater will be warmer and the melting will accelerate. So the measure that we take today will bring its consequences only 30 years later, perhaps. For this reason, it will not be appropriate to tell the United States and the pollutant countries, or those countries who contribute to the higher emission of the carbon dioxide, let us continue to pollute for a moment until we come to your level, and then we will stop. This is not the right approach. Every country should assume the responsibility of stopping it, but trying perhaps to find other ways to get compensated. This is what could be thought of. In the United States, it is the ordinary people who suffer from the consequences, but those who benefit from higher emission of carbon dioxide is the industry. So if awareness is created in the United States, perhaps this will also affect the American decision makers. Regarding the Security Council or enlarged G20, where Turkey is a member at present, of course it will be very difficult to get rid of the present structure of the United Nations Security Council, because a viable alternative or better alternative is not proposed yet. Why not? Because it's like democracy at the national level. When you let people guided by demagogues who can move people emotionally, no matter how wise your position is, it is those demagogues who will pull the people behind them and get more votes. At the international scale, since there are several countries that are not run by democracy, if they are given equitable chance to reflect their position in the United Nations model without Security Council, then we may run into trouble because of those countries that are not run by democracy. So if a viable proposal is made, perhaps the permanent members of the Security Council will be more lenient to the solution. But I still believe that what Madam has proposed, that's to say, a group of wise men may throw an idea open and perhaps may build on it. Thank you.
Well, I want very, very quickly the question on the United Nations versus G20 to say very simply, no, the G20 have been, they are created out of necessity. It's not an official body. They don't care about vetoes and about gaining positions there. They are there, all of them, to take urgent decisions, and they understand that there should be a consensus in the end in order to reach those decisions. Is far better. I fear that the United Nations are going to continue for a very long while in the future before they decide what sort of reforms they're going to agree with. Now, on the Copenhagen, which is much more serious case, so far as I am concerned, first of all, I would say that in the Philippines, they quite rightly are concerned with climate change, having suffered 3 hurricanes in a row, so destructive. But in the United States, I'm afraid, and I was there last month, they have not realized that Hurricane Katrina or the drought in Texas has anything to do with climate change. It is not among the priorities of the debates in public opinion, the issue of climate change. President Obama, yes, is a difference, but President Obama needs the support of the Senate, and it's not obvious at the moment that he has the support of the Senate in order there would be commitments in Copenhagen. That is why, in my view,
First of all, we have to be very strict with the European Union, those that belong to the European Union, to keep its promises about leading the way, 20, 20, and if necessary, if the others agree, 30% by 2020 and up to 80% by 2050. And the commitment to assist developing countries has been calculated 200 billion euros per year, part of it to come from the European Union, part of it from elsewhere, and part of it from the developing countries themselves. And then I think that no uniform method can be reached in Copenhagen. For instance, Brazil or Indonesia, it's enough to commit themselves of stopping or decelerating the pace of deforestation, and it's enough contribution so far they are concerned. China will do something else as an emerging economy, and the United States, who have not worked in the Kyoto Protocol with, let's say, Europe, can commit themselves to catch up with their technology, and they are very capable for that, instead of doing similar things by 2020, to catch up and outpass the European Union a decade later, for instance. Something like that should be Copenhagen.
Well, thank you, and thank you all.
Point of order, just before you close, Mr. Chairman, just one point I wanted to make. After listening to all the boards, I think it's a very important point. It would appear to me that whilst talking globally, everyone now is only speaking about acting regionally. The formation of the European Union, the formation of Asian Pacific Group, United States, Russia, and no one is really thinking globally about the idle perception of one world government, the idle perception of one army in this world where we would not have to waste.
Thank you. I think that I would dispute that. I think that we were very much on the global level, at least in the last interventions. But we are not perfect. We don't have the solutions, all of them. Actually, regarding Security Council reform, we were actually this close to it only a few years ago. And one would hope that since then there would have grown a sense of urgency with all the crises in the world, that we could return to it. Now, patience is an Asian virtue which we have been sorely lacking in Europe in the past. But however, facing climate change is something we cannot be patient about. We have to be very impatient on that. Yes, the costs are high for everyone, in my country, in all of our countries, for the world as a whole. But we must know that the costs of not stopping climate change will be even higher. And this should we always have in mind. So thank you all for the panelists, all our panelists, and thank you the audience. We have not deserved lunch, but I think the audience has deserved now the lunch break, which will be next on the program. Thank you.